The fall of man. Genesis chapter 2 verse 4 to chapter 3 verse 24. Ezekiel chapter 28 verses 11 to 26. And Romans chapter 5 verses 12 to 21. Introduction. What do you feel when you commit sin? How do you deal with it? Our parasha deals with the history of the heavens and the earth when they were created, the creation of man and his fall into temptation. Today, temptation is one of the chief functions of Satan and his demons. Now the question is, how did man fall into sin? I want to get my answers from the book of Psalms chapter 1 verse 1, and it says, "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful." First, man fell into sin because he walks, which means he entertained the temptation. Satan, being a fallen archangel, obviously Eve was the object of his attack, being the weaker one and needing the protection of Adam. Satan found her alone. In effect, Satan said, "Has God said, 'You shall not eat of every tree of the garden and surely you shall not die?'" For Eve, instead of running away from temptation, she entertained it. The classic example of running away from temptation was Joseph. He did not entertain the wife of Potiphar. We are tempted to sin in the same manner. Satan will try to get us in the wrong manner because he is like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. During the time of temptation we have to remember James chapter 4 verse 7, "Resist, do not entertain, the devil and he will flee from you." Second, man fell into sin because he stands. For me, standing in temptation means deceived. In verse 6 of chapter 3 it says that Eve saw that the tree was good for food and pleasant to the eyes. She was deceived and decided that Satan was telling the truth, and she misunderstood God. Apostolic writing confirms that Eve was deceived in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 3, "But I fear lest somehow, as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, so your minds may be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Yeshua." Satan was not successful when he tempted Yeshua because he used the word, the Torah of God, to combat Satan. For us to avoid being deceived by Satan's tactical, we must have to be wise and strong foundation of his Torah. Psalm chapter 19, verse 7 says, "The testimony Torah of the Lord is sure and making wise the simple." Lastly, man fell into sin because he sits. For me, sits means choice or decision. In Genesis chapter 2 verse 16 to 17, God commanded the man saying, "Of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat." It was a test of obedience by which Adam and Eve were tried, so they had a choice to obey or not. Eve made the wrong choice. She partook of the forbidden fruit, and also Eve blamed Satan and Adam blamed Eve. They each bore the consequences as each had made the choice to commit sin. Indeed, sin is all about choices. It is important to understand and know right from wrong. Ask yourself, what kind of choice am I making? Now let us proceed to our Haftarah portion, and let me give you a brief background of Tyre. Tyre was an important Phoenician port and mercantile center in ancient times. It was an island, located half a mile from the Mediterranean coastline, approximately 30 miles north of Israel. With the reign of Hiramite 980 to 947 BCE, Tyre became the most important city and is best known for its of Tyrian purple dye manufactured from the shell of the sea snail. What was the proclamation of prophet Ezekiel about the king of Tyre? If we are going to start with verse 1 to 10. That the king eventually will perish by the hands of uncircumcised strangers. Why? Because the king was so proudful and arrogant that he imagines himself to be a god. Now I noticed something about the word of Adonai that aimed to Ezekiel in verse 11 to 19, which is the story of Genesis 2 to 3, where Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden and Adonai placed cherubim at the east of the garden to guard the way to the tree of life. In Ezekiel it is the king of Tyre was punished and expelled from the mountain of God. Our apostolic portion, Paul compares the act of Adam and the act of Yeshua. For Paul, sin entered through Adam while grace entered through Yeshua. Death reigns from Adam while righteousness reigns from Yeshua. Adam's sin resulted in condemnation while through Yeshua there is justification. Through Adam many were made sinners but through Yeshua many will be made righteous. One man affected the entire world and brought sin and death to mankind, but one man affected the world who died on the cross and made righteousness and the restoration of life available to mankind. The connection of our parasha is very obvious. In Torah man was tempted and sinned. In Haftarah the king of Tyre sinned because of his pride and imagines himself to be a god. In Apostolic because of one man's sin entered the world, but because of one man who died on the cross, salvation and eternal life became possible to us. Back to my introduction. What do you feel when you commit sin and how do you deal with it? Salvation is our greatest need. We need to be delivered from sin. We need to be forgiven and reconciled to God. We need the gift of eternal life and God the Father working through just one man, and he is Messiah Yeshua. Shabbat Shalom.